Welcome to WhiskyCast, cask strength conversation featuring news and interviews from the world of whiskey. I'm Mark Gillespie. This is episode number 1012 for July 9th, 2023. Coming up in a few minutes.
We've been asked to do something like this forever, and we've wanted to. So I'm really happy, especially on the 135th anniversary of the brand, that we were able to put this kit together, all 10 recipes.
Four Roses is celebrating its 135th anniversary this year, and for the first time ever is releasing a tasting kit with all 10 of its recipes in one package. I'll talk with Master Distiller Brent Elliott about the anniversary and what makes those 10 recipes unique on this week's WhiskyCast In-Depth. I'll also have the What I'm Tasting This Week department, behind the label, and much more. The news is next on this week's WhiskyCast.
And now, a message from Robin Redbreast.
Ever wondered where Redbreast got its name? Well, let's go back to 1912 and be glad our bird-watching founder didn't spot the bar-tailed godwit that day.
Proud sponsor of WhiskyCast. Redbreast. Pass it on.
How about a really great 12-year-old Scotch whiskey? I have a stellar recommendation coming up for you in just a minute. Spoiler alert, it's Dewar's 12-year-old.
Let's get started with the week's news. It's brought to you by the Dalmore. We have some debuts to lead off the show with this week. In Wales, the Welsh Whisky Company plans to cut the ribbon on its third Penderyn distillery this Thursday. The distillery has been built in a former copper works in Swansea. Japan's Kurosawa Distillers has commissioned the stills on the new Komoro distillery and will be opening the Visitors Center to the public for the first time on July 23rd. In Pennsylvania, Liberty Pole Spirits opens its new whiskey campus to the public this coming Saturday. The expanded production facility includes 2 pot stills and a traditional 5-story rickhouse, along with a new Visitors Center and whiskey shop. And in Scotland, the Scotch Whisky Experience is set to debut its new tour to the public starting next week. The multimedia experience replaces the barrel ride that had been in place for many years. CEO Susan Morrison says it'll be a perfect way to introduce newcomers to Scotch whisky.
At last survey, 79% of our visitors said they knew little or nothing about whiskey. So our job for the industry is to take these people in and ignite that spark so that they're going to go further. They're going to maybe visit a distillery, or they're going to start talking about whiskey or buying whiskey. It's all about igniting that spark in visitors. So whatever we do has to be entertaining as well as informative.
We'll hear more from Susan Morrison next time around. In other news, if you have a miniature bottle of Sazerac's W.L. Weller Bourbon, congratulations, you have a counterfeit bottle. Sazerac won a lawsuit against Allocated Liquors, which resells alcohol online. The defendants were caught selling gift sets with mini bottles of Weller, which Buffalo Trace has never produced. It claims it bought the Weller bourbon from a seller on Etsy.com, which doesn't allow alcohol sales. Sazerac won $30,000 in damages. Back in May, we mentioned Duncan Taylor & Company's special coronation set of Laphroaig whiskies released for the coronation of King Charles III. This week, Duncan Taylor presented set number 1 to Queen Camilla during her first royal engagement as Queen in Scotland when she met with artists and craftspeople in Edinburgh. All of the remaining 149 sets were sold to collectors. Pernod Ricard is selling off one of its blended Scotch whisky brands. The Clan Campbell brand is being sold to Stock Spirits, subject to regulatory approval. The deal will let Stock Spirits expand into Western Europe, where Clan Campbell is popular, while Pernod Ricard gets to focus on other priority brands. No purchase price was announced. New whiskeys unveiled this week. The Glenrothes is showing off its new 25-year-old edition. It's been matured in first-fill sherry-seasoned American and European oak casks, with a small percentage coming from refill and ex-bourbon casks. There's no word on pricing. Spirit of Yorkshire Distillery in England has released the latest batch of their peated finish single malt. It's matured in first-fill ex-bourbon barrels before being finished in ex-peated whiskey casks. It's available through the distillery's website and select retailers in the UK for £65 a bottle. Whiskey and music go together, and that's the case with a new project from whiskey writer and musician Philippe Schreiberg and musician Paul Archibald. They play together as the Rhythm and Booze Project and have created a whiskey label as well as a record label. The first release from Rhythm and Booze Records is a 13-year-old blended malt matured in a sherry butt, and the bottle has a QR code on the back to allow consumers to download and stream the companion playlist to listen to while they enjoy a dram. There's a link for more details in the show notes for this episode at WhiskyCast.com. On that note, pun intended, Catoctin Creek Distilling is getting ready to release the latest edition of its Ragnarok rye in conjunction with the heavy metal band Gwar. It's a special bottling marking the 10th anniversary of the death of the band's original frontman, Odorous Arungus, and is finished in rum casks. It'll be available at the Virginia Distillery starting August 1st. You can keep up on the week's whiskey news all week long at WhiskyCast.com and in the WhiskyCast community app. The news is brought to you by the Dalmore.
Hello, Richard Patterson here, Master Distiller, Master Blender for the Dalmore. You know, whenever the team and I are in the world sharing our exceptional single malt, we like to keep in touch with Mark Gillespie and the latest news from WhiskyCast.
Social media has been in the news a lot this week with the launch of Meta's Threads app. You'll find us there at WhiskyCast, along with Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram. But the best place for whiskey conversation online is in the WhiskyCast community app, where we have members from all over the world. Download the app for free from the Apple or Google app stores, or you can access the web-based version at WhiskyCast.com. Time now to take a look at upcoming whiskey events around the world. Our calendar is brought to you by Writer's Tears. Sagamore Spirit Distillery's next Whiskey on the Waterfront party is this coming Saturday, July 15th in Baltimore, Maryland, along with Catoctin Creek's next bottling workshop in Purcellville, Virginia. Bourbon's Bistro in Louisville, Kentucky has a Bourbon and Broadway dinner on the 19th. Whiskey Live Sydney takes place July 21st and 22nd in Sydney, Australia. Belfast Whiskey Week kicks off on the 21st and runs through the 29th in Northern Ireland. Tales of the Cocktail runs from the 23rd through the 28th in New Orleans, and the Twisted Tale in Philadelphia celebrates National Scotch Whiskey Day on the 27th with a Lafroig tasting. If you're organizing a whiskey event, let us know about it. We'll add it to the calendars at WhiskyCast.com and in the WhiskyCast community app. Our calendar is presented by Writer's Tears.
Writer's Tears Copper Pot, an 18th century style of premium Irish whiskey, blended from single pot still and single malt. Like yourself, it's one of life's treasured rarities, and what's rare is wonderful. Writer's Tears Copper Pot.
Gabriel here. The new Dewar's 12-year-old has been completely remastered to be richer, smoother, and more balanced. It's a total winner. It's double-aged in first fill premium bourbon casks for greater depth and breadth of flavor, with notes of apples, lemon zest, and spicy and floral notes with a long, smooth vanilla finish. The experts agree too. It's winning awards like pros sink putts. In fact, WhiskyCast's own Mark Gillespie gave it a 94-point rating, which is pretty amazing for a 12-year-old Scotch. It's also earned a 94-point rating from Whiskey Advocate. That makes it their highest-rated 12-year-old Scotch whiskey. It's an excellent testament to the skill, craft, and refinement of the world's most awarded blended Scotch whiskey, Dewar's. Drink responsibly. Copyright 2023 Dewar's Blended Scotch Whiskey, 40% alcohol by volume.
WhiskyCast In-Depth is brought to you by Mortlock and the Classic Malts lineup. Four Roses is marking the brand's 135th anniversary this year, and to celebrate, the distillery is releasing a tasting kit with samples of all 10 recipes that go into the various Four Roses bourbons. I spent some time on an occasionally distorted Zoom call this week with Master Distiller Brent Elliott. So first off, let's talk about the 135th anniversary of Four Roses. Tell me about the origin story.
So, our founder, Paul Jones Jr., he started the brand in Atlanta, Georgia. But in the early 1880s, he had to move up to Kentucky for prohibition reasons down south there. So he packed up, moved up to Kentucky, started selling Four Roses right there on Whiskey Row in Louisville, and trademarked the name. He'd been using the name, but it was trademarked in 1888. So that was really the birth of the name Four Roses.
But when did he open a distillery?
He had a business in selling whiskey. He didn't have a distillery in Georgia, and even here he was more of a wholesaler up to Prohibition, and then with Prohibition, he'd already passed away. He passed away in 1895, but his nephew Lawrence LaValle Jones purchased the Frankfurt Distilling Company to get them a medicinal license to continue selling Four Roses. I believe that was 1922. And then just after Prohibition, they actually began distilling at the Four Roses Distillery, the Frankfurt Distillery, which actually moved from Frankfurt to Louisville during that time period.
So when was the Lawrenceburg Distillery built?
The Lawrenceburg Distillery was built in 1910. So it really didn't meet the Four Roses brand until it was purchased by Seagram's in 1946, I believe it was.
And that's when Seagram's took it over and made it the brand it is today.
Well, Seagram's purchased the brand from the Jones. They bought the Frankfurt Distilling Company from the Jones family in 1943. And this was when they were acquiring different distilleries. So at that time, at the end of the acquisition, they had 5 different distilleries in the state of Kentucky. And so this wasn't necessarily the Four Roses distillery at that point. It was one of 5 different Seagram's distilleries that was producing straight bourbon whiskey that went into all of their products, in particular Four Roses. And through the years, these other distilleries were decommissioned, and now we are the only remaining distillery from that those Seagram's Kentucky distilleries. So, of course, now we produce all of Four Roses, and that's all we produce. That's a mouthful right there. It's the convoluted and difficult history in about 2 minutes.
Well, you told it well.
I hope so.
Let's talk about the yeast strains in the anniversary kit, because the 135th anniversary tasting kit is the first one I can think of that's included all 10 recipes.
It is. It's the first time we've ever done this. And we've been asked to do something like this forever, and we've wanted to. So I'm really happy, especially on the 135th anniversary of the brand, that we were able to put this kit together, all 10 recipes.
Where did the 10 recipes come from?
Those also go back to the Seagram's days. Back when these different distilleries were producing different bourbons for all their different products, they wanted different flavor profiles in the different barrels so that they'd have more versatility in whatever product the recipes are being used for. And fortunately, Four Roses Bourbon has always used all 10 recipes. So when we were purchased by Kieran in 2002 and essentially broke apart from the Seagram's family, those were the 5 yeast strains that we brought with us for continuity to continue producing Four Roses Bourbon.
So 2 mash bills, 5 different yeast strains, and you get a rainbow of flavors.
Absolutely. It's 10 unique and distinctly different recipes.
Let's go through the code for those who aren't familiar with the coding system that you use. The O and the S are constants. The O is for Four Roses Distillery. The S is for straight bourbon. But the second and fourth letters are the ones that change, right?
Yeah, those are the ones to pay attention to. The second letter that indicates which mash bill it is. The B code indicates the high rye mash bill, which is 60% corn, 35% rye, and 5% malted barley. The E code indicates that it's the lower rye mash bill, which is still pretty high. It's 20% rye, 75% corn, and 5% malted barley. And then the last character that will designate which yeast strain was used in the fermentation. And we've got, for example, like the O yeast strain that creates a rich, rounded, fruity flavor. The V strain is more of a delicate fruit. The K is spicy. The Q is floral, and the F is minty, sometimes clove-like. So with those combinations, you get the varying level of rye, or on the counter side, higher level of corn, so maybe more sweetness with the two different mash bills, and then those complementary flavors and aromas you get from each one of those different strains.
Which one do you have a preference for yourself?
I truly don't. It changes day to day, batch to batch. I don't have one particular strain that I gravitate to significantly more than the others. I mean, there are a couple that, like, we're talking about the private barrel program when I'm doing selections. You know, there's some that I tend to gravitate to more often, but I can't say that there's just definitively one that is my favorite.
What would be the taste difference, for instance, between, say, an OBSF and an OESF?
That one's really interesting because to me, the F strain already has some flavor characteristics that kind of remind me of rye. It kind of has that minty, almost lightly phenolic green characteristic to it. I know green isn't a very good flavor descriptor, but something about rye just reminds me of herbs and, fresh, green, spicy type flavors. So the F already kind of contributes a lot of that to it. So I think that with the B mash bill really gives you, it's like it supplements that rye flavor already and gives you an impression of even higher rye than 35%. I think in the OESF, with you get a little more sweetness from the corn, a little bit less rye spice. And so I think the FE strain comes through. It's not as complemented with the rye, so you get more of just the straight F characteristic, which to me is it's kind of clove-like. Sometimes it's a little more mellow in the minty flavors that come across, but overall just a little bit more subdued in that herbal and spicy range of flavors.
What would be the difference, say, between an OESQ and an OBSQ?
It'll be this kind of the same what I said there, except you won't have the F, or I'm sorry, you won't have that rye and F synergy. It would just be you'd have some of the floral kind of candied notes with more of a rye undertone with the high rye mash bill. With the lower rye, it would be, again, a little bit sweeter, less spicy, and you'd probably get some of those floral notes coming through a little bit more. They'd be more apparent probably in an OESQ. And this is in general. And sometimes you can have an OESQ that is, or an E mash bill that for whatever reason the rye is really coming through super strong in certain batches or barrels. But I'm just sort of speaking in general terms.
And of course, you can blend these recipes to get a unique characteristic, right?
Yeah, that's we basically use the 10 recipes for two reasons. One is to maintain consistency. It gives us control over the final flavor of any of our products because we can tweak what goes into it as far as the recipes go. But I think probably on the more exciting side of it, we use it to create variety in all of our products. For example, the F that I've just talked about quite a bit, that is one of the dominant recipes in the small batch select. But you won't find it in standard small batch. Small batch is the O yeast strain, which is the fruity one. So if you taste those two side by side, you're going to get a lot more of the mint and the spice and the herbal characteristic out of the select than you taste the small batch. And it's a different mouthfeel. It's a different level of sweetness. It's a different, it's all that fruit. And there's still some spice, but it's mostly defined by that O yeast strain. So that's that's exactly how we use the different recipes, is to create variety and truly fundamental different flavors in each one of our products.
How do you blend the regular Four Roses bourbon?
That one is typically all 10 recipes, and they're all in there at different percentages. And what we have is just the standard profile that's existed in that product for years. And so we use those 10 recipes, in different combinations each year to make sure that we maintain that same flavor profile.
How long did it take you to master the 10 different recipes?
It took a while. I know when I first started, I tell people this a lot, about how to develop your palate. I think the first thing you kind of learn, or the first things that are apparent, are sort of the anomalies in bourbon or anything, like whether it's a defect or just an anomaly. And then I think the more you progress, the more you can start to understand levels of good or great, or what you like, or what is high quality bourbon. I think that's sort of the next level of understanding what you're smelling, what you're tasting. Because I know when the day I started, I had the same nose that I have today, but it's just that understanding and getting familiar with what you're smelling, what you're tasting, and associating with memories from doing this all the time, to where you sort of really build your own, kind of flavor personality. So you understand what you're smelling. You can guess how it might work with another recipe or another spirit to see how they blend together. It's not always the case. A lot of times you're surprised, but I think that's it. Just building that internal library and that understanding of flavors, so that you're not just smelling it like I did when I first started. I would just smell it and say, that's good, or that's great. But I couldn't. In most cases, as a consumer, for a consumer, that's enough. I tell people all the time, you don't have to be able to break it down and write a poem about the flavor notes. You just have to know what you like. And so it makes it fun too. And you can take it as far as you want, or you can just sit back and enjoy your bourbon and not try to think too much about it.
Is there a recipe that works better in some cocktails than others?
I tend to think that the higher rye recipes will hold up better in cocktails that have stronger flavors, in particular, like bitters or Campari, anything that has like a very strong flavor. I think if you don't have enough rye and you don't have enough backbone and I guess strong flavors in the bourbon, sometimes it can kind of fall apart in the face of these other flavors that can sometimes overwhelm them. So sometimes I like small batch, which is not as high in rye. It's because it's split evenly down the middle of the two mash bills. I think that one works very well. That and some of the lower rye mash bills, maybe in some of the more subtle, like fruitier, sweeter cocktails. I think that is a fine choice and a great choice for some of those. So it really depends on what the flavors are that you're trying to complement. If you're looking for something that is going to meld with the other flavors or stand up and create like a balanced counterposition on the palate. So it just depends on the other ingredients.
We should be about due here in the next month or so for a new small batch select, right?
Yeah, in September, we will release the limited edition. And as we always do for any type of anniversary, this will be the 135th version of our small batch limited edition. So it's all finalized. We'll be dumping it later this month, but it won't show up on shelves until September in Kentucky. And then we'll follow in other states shortly after that.
Just in time for the Bourbon Festival.
That's right.
By the way, the 135th anniversary tasting kit includes a QR code for a virtual tutored tasting with Brent Elliott. It's available at the Four Roses Visitors Centers in Lawrenceburg and Cox's Creek, Kentucky, along with retailers in Kentucky, Georgia, Illinois, and California. That's WhiskyCast In-Depth. It's brought to you by Mortlach, whiskey's best-kept secret. Hidden away for decades in some of the world's most famous Scotch whiskies, comes a single malt inspired by an original for a fortunate few. Discover the entire Mortlach lineup at malts.com. The What I'm Tasting This Week department is brought to you by Sagamore Spirit. Earlier this year, I tasted a series of House of Hazelwood releases but there were a couple of samples I did not taste at the time. Took care of that this week, and let's start off with the Unknown. It's a 44-year-old blended Scotch that was blended back in 1989 and left to sit in a single refill butt for more than 30 years. It's bottled at 43.3% ABV. The nose has wood spices and hints of molasses and brown sugar. The taste starts off with candied fruits and brown sugar, with wood spices that come out as the sweeter notes start to fade, along with hints of honey and dried fruits in the background. The finish is amazingly long, with wood spices, honey, and dried fruits. It's a very complex dram, and I'm scoring the Unknown from the House of Hazelwood a 96. The latest batch of House of Hazelwood releases also included the 8-grain. It's a 40-year-old blended grain Scotch whiskey bottled at 48.5% ABV. The nose has touches of lemon furniture polish, dried flowers, and vanilla cream. The taste has fruity notes of pineapple, lemon zest, banana, and dried fruits, balanced by a hint of menthol along with honey and vanilla cream. The finish is tongue-tingling with pineapple, lemon zest, and a hint of grapefruit. I'm scoring the 8-grain from the House of Hazelwood a 94. I'll have more tasting notes in just a minute. But first, our tasting notes are brought to you this week by Sagamore Spirit, a 200-time award-winning Maryland-style rye whiskey. With a determined focus to create the best rye whiskey imaginable, Sagamore's team of distillers crafts each spirit with a nod to both tradition and innovation. Find their signature Double Oak, Cask Strength, or Reserve Series rye whiskeys, as well as their line of premium rye whiskey canned cocktails at a retailer near you. Visit sagamorespirit.com/find-rye. Please drink responsibly. Moving on now, but sticking with grain whiskies for a moment, I've often said that single grain and blended grain Scotch whiskies are a great alternative to single malts on a hot summer day, and that's the case with Claxton's Grain Barn, a 30-year-old single grain matured in ex-bourbon casks and bottled at 48% ABV. The nose on this one is delicate and sweet with caramel candy, dark chocolate, dried fruits, and a hint of linseed oil. The taste is creamy with a nice kick of white pepper spice along with lemon zest and dark chocolate notes, while the finish is long with a lingering spiciness. I'm scoring the Claxton's Grain Barn 30-year-old single-grain Scotch a 93. And finally, I received a sample the other day of the latest Frey Ranch bourbon, their farm-strength uncut bourbon bottled at 62.15% ABV. This is a classic bourbon with a nose full of caramel, honey, tobacco, leather, and a hint of cherries. The taste is thick and chewy with black pepper and chili powder spices that fade slowly to reveal hints of caramel and black cherries. Adding some water is recommended with this one. It softens the spices slightly while opening up touches of red apples on the palate. The finish, medium length and dry with lingering spices. I'm scoring Frey Ranch's Farm Strength Bourbon a 91. The What I'm Tasting This Week department is brought to you by Sagamore Spirit. I'll be adding these tasting notes to our searchable list of more than 3,500 different whiskeys from all over the world. Check it out this week at WhiskyCast.com.
And now, a message from Robin Redbreast.
Kentucky and Ireland have plenty in common. Two homes of horse racing. Bluegrass music is said to have Irish roots. Okay, it's not the longest list, but the Redbreast Kentucky Oak Edition only strengthens the bond. Finished in sustainably sourced Kentucky oak for a captivating nose and round taste. I see a triple crown in this thoroughbred's future.
Proud sponsor of WhiskyCast. Redbreast. Pass it on.
Let's open up the inbox now for our community segment presented by Waterford Whiskey. More comments keep coming in about our show 2 weeks ago with Charles McLean and Ian Buxton. Got this email the other day from our friend Michael Fraser Milne at the Whiskey Galore shop in Christchurch, New Zealand. Mark, we were sitting in the office the other day and put on the cast with Charlie and Ian, and they talked about cask investment. Just FYI, we had a client about to buy a cask through a third-party broker. After listening to the cast, I suggested they request a delivery order and some sort of proof of purchase between the distiller or seller prior to buying. Interestingly, neither could or would be provided. Also, I thought Ian's point about who owns the cask when you cannot sell it or bottle it under your own label, etc., very good point indeed. When we first started out in New Zealand as a business, we were dealing for many years with the fallout from a cask investment company who sold the same cask many times, mostly from Speyside, and they sold a lot in New Zealand. We have recently started doing auctions to help some clients in New Zealand who have no end options for their collections. We insist on provenance for products and are only doing this on occasion, as it's a lot of work for little return, at least in New Zealand, but great for these clients, most who have dealt with us for years. Interestingly, a very nice lady offered us a cask for our auction next week, which she has certificates for, however could not prove where it was or what she was allowed to do with it, and totally confused by our checking methods. We now endeavor to see if she actually owns a cask or not on her behalf. Anyway, please do keep up the good work. You provide an incredible service to our industry. Thank you, Michael. We appreciate the kind words. And Callum posted this comment on our Spotify feed. Great episode. Charlie reminds me so much of my dad and his mates, one of those guys I'd have at my if you could choose any 5 guests for a dinner party. Pretty sure he'd bring a killer bottle. I'm sure Charlie would. If you have something you'd like to share with whiskey lovers around the world, download our WhiskyCast community app from the Google or Apple app stores and join the conversation. You can also find us on Twitter, Facebook, Instagram, and now Threads at WhiskyCast. The email address is comments@whiskycast.com. Our community segment is sponsored by Waterford Whiskey, where they explore the frontiers of natural flavor one farm at a time to create unique Irish whiskeys. Visit them on the web at waterfordwhiskey.com. Let's close out the show now with Behind the Label, our look at the history, science, and people who make whiskey unique. A couple of weeks ago, we looked at caramel coloring in whiskey, and since then we've had requests for a look at that other something of a 4-letter word among whiskey lovers, chill filtering. Basically, it's done to make whiskeys appear clear on a store shelf. You see, unfiltered whiskeys have fatty compounds that aren't water-soluble, and they can make a whiskey look cloudy depending on the bottling strength. They're removed by lowering the temperature of a whiskey down to around 0 degrees Celsius, then putting the whiskey through a series of filtration pads to take out the fatty compounds that can flocculate in the bottle. Now, critics of chill filtering argue that the process strips some of the flavor out of whiskeys, while supporters argue that there's little or no taste difference between chill-filtered and unfiltered whiskeys. The sweet spot for leaving the filtration machine out of the process is around 46% ABV. Above that point, the fatty compounds dissolve in the alcohol and don't cause the flocculation problem. It's safe to assume that unless it says so on the bottle, anything bottled below 46% ABV has probably been chill-filtered. If you have something you'd like us to look at on an upcoming episode, just get in touch with us. The email address is comments@whiskycast.com, or you can get to us right away in the WhiskyCast community app. That's all for this episode of WhiskyCast. You'll find links for the stories in this episode in our show notes at whiskycast.com, along with the latest news, my tasting notes, and of course our archive of episodes that goes all the way back to 2005. Our free WhiskyCast community app is available in the Apple and Google app stores, and you can always get in touch with us on Instagram, Facebook, and Twitter at WhiskyCast, Threads too. Of course, email is an option as well. Our address is comments@whiskycast.com.
Find the new Dewar's 12-year-old and discover what all the awards are about. You can toast and thank me later. From Dewar's, the world's most awarded blended Scotch whiskey.
And now, a message from Robin Redbreast.
A thoughtful gift is hard work. What you need is a go-to multi-purpose gift for all occasions. A bottle of Redbreast can say, "Enjoy every minute, they grow up so fast." And equally nails, Apologies for the back pain. I should have just hired a moving company.
Proud sponsor of WhiskyCast. Redbreast. Pass it on.
WhiskyCast is a production of Cask Strength Media, copyright 2023, and comes to you from the charming, yet regrettably dry town of Haddonfield, New Jersey. I'm Mark Gillespie, reminding you that when you drink, please drink responsibly. Thanks for listening.